Well, in my world, your claim to fame is inventing. I don't know if inventing is the right way of putting it, but coining the term work tech as opposed to HR tech. And so I was wondering if, first of all, you could kind of explain if work tech is any different than HR tech, why work tech is a more appropriate use of the terminology, and what was kind of the thinking behind that, because I imagine it's quite insightful for our audience.
I'm glad you noticed that I had something to do with that. I don't know if I can take full claim to the name as far as coining it, but I definitely take credit for defining the category.
What I wanted to bring you on today, under that kind of guise that if you follow the money, you can make predictions about the future, is to start talking about what are we going to start seeing from a technology standpoint in 2026. If we want to see, like, what are the real winners, what are the technologies we're going to see mature, what's going to happen? Because again, I think a lot of practitioners, they just assume that innovation is uniform. It's just going to continue to happen just like it has in the past. But as people like you have kind of brought to my attention, is that innovation is not uniform. You have to follow the money and where the effort and where the investment is going. And so I was hoping maybe we could do sort of a prediction episode of sorts of what do you see is going to happen in 2026, from an investment standpoint, an innovation standpoint, and a technology standpoint.
I try not to make predictions, but I'm happy to tell you where I think things are going. I'm happy to stand behind it and come back and
Maybe we could take a step back and talk about where has the money been flowing in the work tech space in terms of investments, maybe over like the last 2 years. Because if you think about it, if somebody got an investment 2 years ago, that technology should really be starting to mature right around now or over the next year or so. And so could we talk about that at all? Like, who got the investments in the past, and that's where we should start to see the real innovation happening in the space.
yeah, I think that's a great lens to sort of have this discussion through.
Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, George LaRocque, founder of WorkTech and leading industry analyst. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. This podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics, workforce planning, talent intelligence, behavioral science, and understand the impacts of AI in the workplace. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to Directionally Correct Substack newsletter, where you can read Cole's articles or watch the video of the podcast. You can also see video on Spotify or YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. Feel free to check out Cole's new book, People Analytics, and everything else that's going on at colenapper.com. As always, all opinions are our own, and thanks for being a listener. Well, George, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today. You know that I'm just a fan of really smart people in this space, and I consider you to be one of the smartest. So I really appreciate you joining me today on Directionally Correct.
Well, it's really great to be here. I'm honored that you think of me that way. I try to do good work, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I think the same of you and the work that you do.
Absolutely. Well, in my world, your claim to fame is inventing. I don't know if inventing is the right way of putting it, but coining the term work tech as opposed to HR tech. And so I was wondering if, first of all, you could kind of explain if work tech is any different than HR tech, why work tech is a more appropriate use of the terminology, and what was kind of the thinking behind that, because I imagine it's quite insightful for our audience.
I'm glad you noticed that I had something to do with that. I don't know if I can take full claim to the name as far as coining it, but I definitely take credit for defining the category
Yeah.
and really, putting the flag in the ground from a categorical perspective. Um, so if you go back to, it's probably really a long time when I think about the promise of HR tech. The promise of HR tech, it has been to improve work, right? Improve the, whether it's the contract between the employer and the employee, or whether it is the an employee's performance, or an individual finding a job, or learning once they're on the job, etc. But the category name itself, HR tech, sort of is for tech that HR uses. It doesn't include the workforce. But for a long time, it was largely appropriate because the systems have been built for the employers, whether that's a small employer and small, medium-sized business, or a large global enterprise. Around, I would say, 2010, we started to see employees be put first from a tech perspective, and started to see glimmers of a lot of this movement to where uh, work was the work and the work product and all of that aspirational stuff that I started with, starting to deliver on that. And then as we move into 2019, 2020, which is where I sort of put that flag in the ground, that's where the early emergence of AI and much of the newer technology and what we're able to do with data started. You can really see now where the all of the stakeholders in this market are being served by the technology. So I think WorkTech becomes an even more fitting name. To answer your question, is it different? I think it's largely different in the sense that it's not just about the back office HR user, talent acquisition user, IT based user. It's really about reaching into the enterprise, to the employee, candidate, etc.
Well, I love it. I'm appreciative of you. You and I met. We met back in probably, I think it was 2021 at the Greenhouse Conference. And one of the things that I think is beautiful about this community. So I've always been heavily into the people analytics and the workforce planning space, but never too much into the broader HR scene of what's going on from a technology perspective, or just kind of the influencer side of things, what they call it nowadays. And I met you, and you were just super nice and super approachable. And so at one point, you even got me involved in your accelerator, which I'm not sure what the state of it is right now, but Impact WorkTech Accelerator, which I thought was such a cool program. And I met a few really cool burgeoning HR tech startups through that. But I think you're more focused now on this HR Tech 100 fund. Do you want to talk about the accelerator at all, or what you're focusing on now?
Yeah, it's the fund in many ways grew from the accelerator experience. The accelerator was really a boot camp. We had a couple of cohorts come through that it was really an introduction for them to the industry. And a lot of what I do, a lot of what WorkTech does with super early stage startups, it, in a lot of ways, it's giving back to the industry and focusing on an area where there isn't a lot of support, whether that's investor support or just general, structured knowledge for these early stage players. So that impact work tech, while it was community based and it was sort of that boot camp, we didn't have a fund. We weren't making investment at that time. We had investors involved. That is actually being redesigned as sort of a community right now. More to come on that at another time. But the HR Tech 100 fund really answers that early stage funding problem. So while we were running the accelerator, we were looking at different models for generating some investment for early, super early stage, pre-seed stage startups. in our space, and we chased a lot of different models that, or explored, I should say, a lot of different models that were going to require us to do a lot of work, that time that we just didn't have. Finally, a partner of mine, Tim Sackett, discovered a platform called Pin, which allowed us to stay focused on angel investors. And he had this great idea about having a real low ask for investors, that we would spread across 100 angels, getting to $1 million of an actual pre-seed fund, and then being able to invest in pre-seed. So we're still raising that fund at this time, but we're on our way, and looking forward to being able to allocate that first tranche of investment out there. So it's exciting. It's still a labor of love. I mean, it is an investment, but it's a lot of work. We've learned a lot through this process.
Well, one of the things that I think is so great about kind of the HR technology community, and especially kind of the people analytics and workforce planning, talent intelligence segment of that community, is it's so entrepreneurial. And so, what's great is that you've kind of been on all sides of it, in the sense that now you're an investor, you've been a industry analyst this whole time, you've been kind of on, and it creates this kind of like virtuous feedback loop of the community giving back to the community and creating better technology as a consequence. And so, that's one of the things I really love about it. But you've got your own podcast as well, which I've graciously been a guest on, and we're both a part of the Work Defined network that Tin Cup has put together, which is amazing. But like, well, first of all, how do you manage
Yeah.
all of that? And I think you're a father and a dad, and you've got two kids. Like, how do you manage all the things that the things that you're juggling in the air? But two, how do they all kind of come together to create kind of this whole that's greater than the sum of its parts?
Well, the family side is, that having a couple of kids in college, and a younger one, on her way to middle school. That's just, the ultimate labor of love. I used that term earlier. So, managing that, I wish I had a secret for you as far as how to balance all these things. But I think whether it's family or work or integrating the two, it's all about priorities, right? So, I really try to stay focused. I tell a lot of startups, I tell a lot of scale ups, you've got to stay focused, whether it's on your ICP or your market, or the problem that you're trying to solve. And I try to live that as well. So I try to prioritize my time. um, what I've tried to build with WorkTech is a market intelligence and advisory firm, with two sides of the business that sort of feed off of each other. So the market intelligence side is what I consider the data and content side. So whether that's talking about the data on a podcast like this, whether that's researching growth capital, M&A, buyer trends, M&A, I mentioned M&A, but macro trends in the market, and putting a report out about it, it really fuels the advisory side of the business. And in the case of this type of content, hopefully, gets me in front of some folks who may find this interesting from a business perspective. So, I try not to think of it like a bifurcated, two different things, but really two sides of the same coin. And that data is a huge asset on the advisory side. Everything that we research and track.
No, I love that. And, me, myself being a previous practitioner, I wasn't as connected with the analyst community in the past. And so I didn't know how to differentiate amongst like what are the strengths that different types of analysts bring to the market. And I think one of the things that is so special and somewhat unique about yours is that market intelligence layer. I think Bitcoiners used to say, change the money, change the world. And I always think about like, follow the money and you can predict the world, right? And I think that you follow the market for HR tech more closely than just about anyone, and it is extremely rigorous and data oriented, which again, I think I appreciate. I'm not sure every HR person appreciates that, but I just think it is so factually oriented that it is extremely helpful. And so one of the things that I was actually hoping to do today is maybe we could take a step back and talk about where has the money been flowing in the work tech space in terms of investments, maybe over like the last 2 years. Because if you think about it, if somebody got an investment 2 years ago, that technology should really be starting to mature right around now or over the next year or so. And so could we talk about that at all? Like, who got the investments in the past? And that's where we should start to see the real innovation happening in the space.
Yeah, I think that's a great lens to sort of have this discussion through. And when you talk about different analysts and the way WorkTech approaches things, I don't know a business or a business person that doesn't try to differentiate themselves, but I do think that is the difference between what we do here versus other analysts. And I love the other analysts. I use all of their work. But my background is more in strategy and taking technology to market and helping the users of the technology succeed. But that strategy layer, that lens is really what I try to bring to the table. So I knew you wanted to talk about some of this. I did. I did pull. It's easier to talk about the numbers with some pictures. So I can give you sort of a high level, and then we can drill in wherever you like. So I first want to just give you some like let's set some context for where we are right now. We've when we look at the first half of this year, and we're now in Q4, but I try not to zoom in too micro because I like looking at a half of the year and sort of thinking about the bigger trends in that way. We saw 3.5 billion across 119 deals in the first half of the year. And that is, the start of a very good year. When you look at the chart on the bottom, these big spikes were the 2021 and 2022 sort of bubble that we had in HR tech. So over here, if we look at where we've been in the first half of this year, we're actually comparatively we're tracking pretty well. We're looking at a pretty good year. Now I can tell you that Q3 doesn't look like Q2. We don't keep spiking, but investor sentiment is really high as we are rolling into Q4. So I do expect this year to be one of the top 5 years. And if you back out these sort of frenzy years is what I like to call them, we're probably in the top 2 or something. So that's the context as we move into the last 2 years, looking at that. So again, just for perspective, I track things at a sort of top line categorical level with HCM, talent acquisition, talent management, sort of a traditional way to look at the categories, and then it's a growing list of subcategories that we track to. We use AI. We sort of crawl all of the announcements. We look at all of the common suspects as far as the CB insights and the pitch books. None of them really have the data categorized at a fine level like this. So we end up using the AI and then actually going through and categorizing it ourselves in order to come up with this data. So this is the 2 years, through September 30th of 2025. And nothing really surprises me here, other than the fact that talent acquisition, I would have normally expected to see that be a little higher from a categorical level. But the last few quarters have been really slow for recruiting, given the job market, given the economy. HCM's always leading. and talent management has been sort of, you know, it's taken a little bit of a hit, but chugging along okay. When we look across the 2 years, it's about 10.6 billion that came in to the market. So it's a healthy number. Again, the issue that we have though, we have a lot of mega deals with, you know, over worth over 100 million,
Mm-hmm.
and then we do have a lot of early stage deals, but there are so many more early stage startups vying for that money that sort of like everything about the economy or every metric you look at, it looks good. These charts look good. It doesn't feel as good out there for a lot of the startups as the charts look. So I took it down to I don't know. Let me pause there. I don't know if you have any observations or questions about any of these categories that.
Yeah, let's kind of let's talk about it for a second. So I want to dig into two things that you said. One was the kind of the 21-22 bubble of sorts with all that investment going into HR tech, and then 2025 kind of being kind of the recovery from that finally. And then the second point that you made about, you know, there's so much investment going into this space and it's cutting across all the different categories, but it may not feel good because there's so many more startups than there used to be. Can you talk at all about like what created so many startups entering the field, and what are kind of the downstream consequences of that bubble that happened back in 2022?
Boy, that's a big question and a good question.
And I
So
knew you were the only one who could
uh,
answer it, George.
so yes, all right. I'm gonna give it a shot. So at a macro level, if you look at, you know, starting a business right now, a tech business right now, becoming a startup, the barrier of entry has been, you know, bottoming out for decades. Right, the cost of starting a business, the cost of starting a tech business. If you talked to me 10 years ago, I would have said it's never been lower. It's still never been lower. So right now, the vibe coding platforms and the number of humans that it takes to get a prototype out into the market or get, you know, understand your product market fit. We see startups at the Pitch Fest in Vegas that I run for HR Tech with now with one or two, you know, co-founders and, you know, beta customers and a little bit of revenue coming in. So there's that macro effect. At the same time, you know, because of that, and when companies go out and they raise, let's say, it's a substantial amount of money, but it's relative to VC, it doesn't sound like much, but they raise a few million. Um, they can get into a cycle where maybe they don't have the revenue, like the market's been tough here for the last few years. They don't have the revenue to really get out and raise that A round. They've had their seed, but they don't have the metrics or the numbers that would substantiate a Series A investment. But they're still out there in the market. They're keeping the lights on. They're paying their people. They're servicing their customers, and they're having some success, limited success. Those those vendors are now, for example, after being in the market for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, coming out to try to raise because they see the sentiment being high as well. This creates a challenge for all of the brand new startups who are, you know, pre-seed, and it just bogs down the whole VC machine. So VC angel investors, they've never had a challenge with deal flow. It's not hard for me to, you know, talk to lots of startups every day. But the challenge is finding startups that have good metrics. So that's just as hard or harder than it ever was. And you know, it doesn't mean that some of those longer in the tooth startups don't have good products or don't deserve to raise, but this just compounds the number of startups that are out there. I haven't seen the startups shuttering their doors like many people might have predicted a couple of
Mhm.
years ago. I've seen more like zombie startups that are sort
Yeah.
of still out there. No offense to anyone who's struggling.
Yeah, I've definitely seen those companies as well. No, I think that those are really, really good points, George. And one of the things, so just for kind of like time capsule purposes, we are recording this on right around Halloween of 2025. But what I wanted to bring you on today, under that kind of guise that if you follow the money, you can make predictions about the future, is to start talking about what are we going to start seeing from a technology standpoint in 2026. If we want to see like what are the real winners, what are the technologies we're going to see mature, what's going to happen, because again, I think a lot of practitioners, they just assume that innovation is uniform. It's just going to continue to happen just like it has in the past. But as people like you have kind of brought to my attention, is that innovation is not uniform. You have to follow the money and where the effort and where the investment is going. And so I was hoping maybe we could do sort of a prediction episode of sorts of what do you see is going to happen in 2026 from an investment standpoint, an innovation standpoint, and a technology standpoint.
I try not to make predictions, but I'm happy to tell you where I think things are going. I'm happy to stand behind it and come back and celebrate or be embarrassed in the future as well. But so let's see. First, let's set the stage. Uh, it's a very what I'll call a lumpy market, right? It's things are choppy when I look at adoption. So there's a ton of hype about AI. So if you're just looking at the headlines, you're under the impression that everybody's implementing AI everywhere across the HR tech stack, and these changes are happening fast and furious. I would say the reality is everybody's looking at AI, everybody is considering AI. In certain areas, we've had use cases that have been successful with AI. Now, AI has been in the market a long time. We've had AI in our product platforms for decades. Your company, Lightcast, I know has big investments in AI. It's not now today. It might be the kind of investments that result in an interface for a user with conversational and generative AI. But 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was more about what was happening with the data and how it was being presented through a SaaS interface. So when we start there and then we look at what's actually being adopted, some of the data from Sapient Insights and Boston Consulting Group and Deloitte shows that most large enterprise companies have only, it's something like half of them have only implemented HR in one domain. When you look at the middle market, it's like 17% have implemented HR, meaning the kind of interface based AI, the generative AI. Most HR people don't realize they've been using AI for a long time. It just hasn't been visible in the interface. Um, so when we look at that, what are the use cases that are successful? It's any place where there's a high volume of transactions, a lot of pain, a lot of administrative work for the users, and a real direct line to ROI. So frontline high volume recruiting, a really great use case. We've seen a lot of activity there and a lot of merger and acquisition activity in that space, whether it's small acquisitions or big ones that move the market, like Workday acquiring Paradox. When we look at the uh, internal sort of service delivery aspect of HR, we're seeing some adoption there. And we're seeing some benefits driven adoption around AI. These are all areas where, again, high numbers of transactions, lots of dollars spent, and a more clear through line to ROI. It doesn't mean the other use cases aren't coming. It's just that we've been more hesitant. So now, when I when I sit back and I look at that, I look at a lot of the data about what users are thinking about. I do have some predictions, but I'll pause there to see if that resonates with you, or if there's anything you want to drill down on that.
I love it. And one word that you brought up multiple times is adoption, right? And money follows what things are being adopted. And in my terms, it's like who's winning customers, who's building tools that people are actually using. So if you look at like where the investments are going right now, where is the adoption occurring and who's winning the customers at the moment?
Yeah. So pay is huge. Another area with a lot of obviously that's the biggest expense for any
Yeah.
at most companies, and it's also one of the biggest areas where compliance is important. So I've got to pay my taxes. I'm also trying to do things like pay fairly. I'm trying to put in compensation, systems that allow me to be more strategic with planning and so forth. So anything that is payroll related, compensation related, I'm seeing a lot of investor sentiment, a lot high sentiment. I'm also seeing a lot of M&A interest. A lot of the strategics are looking at pay. I think there's this new area where I'm seeing a lot of M&A interest from the strategic platforms, and I've yet to see the investment in our space. And I think this is going to be looking into next year. We're going to start to see this, and this is the phrase that's used again and again lately is the office of the CFO. Now, that's not a new phrase if you're in the B2B market, and it speaks to things that are outside of HR. However, the HCM platforms, the strategics are talking about it as it relates to, again, this emergence of WorkTech, the how work, how compensation, how workforce strategy, how strategic workforce planning, budgeting, planning, how that all rolls up into a very strategic lens on the CFO's desk in that office of the CFO. We're going to anybody working, providing the CFO those types of insights. That's a place where investment will start to make itself available, and we're going to see M&A activity in the next couple of quarters and probably throughout the year in that regard. I talked about benefits. I think the other area, the big area when I talk to investors is post hire. So when I'm thinking about learning, when I'm thinking about performance management, these are areas that are ready to be transformed, ready to be disrupted by AI. We've had a lot of tests around learning, around what works for learning. We've had a lot of hesitation around performance management, but this is an area where, because there's so much focus on productivity right now, I think you're going to see, and the workforce is shifting so much that you're going to see a lot of investment in learning and a lot of investment in performance management. The other areas would be anyone who, let me back up. If you own the data right now, if you have data, you have a strategic asset. So if
Yeah.
you're a vendor who owns the data, it's not transient data, it's not transactional data, but you're providing data, and you're providing it in a way with a lens or an interface that is unique. You win. You're going to win a substantial part of this market because all of the AI needs that data. The platforms need it. The apps need it. This is why I talk a lot about the platform shift. This is why platforms are going to be prevalent for a while. So any of the apps that are out there need to have a data strategy. They need to come up with a unique proposition about the data that they're providing to the workflow, to the experience, if you will. This gets into strategic workforce planning. And I think it's also where the only time I'm hearing about talent acquisition right now is like game changing talent acquisition. So I think talent acquisition platforms are fine. I think all of the applications that are going to see funding are going to be those that have a unique data strategy and are really changing the game as far as how candidates interface with jobs, how candidates find jobs, how candidates go through the hiring process from their perspective, and how employers execute from a hiring perspective. It's yes, it's going to be agentic, it's going to be conversational, but it's not going to be limited to high volume frontline hiring any longer.
I love all of that. This is why I think you're so brilliant, George. Because you just hit on the things I'm like, yes, yes. I will like scream the things that you're saying because it's so prescient for what's coming on. But you mentioned strategic workforce planning there for a hot second, but I'm thinking about selfishly people analytics technology, workforce planning technology, talent intelligence. Who's getting investment in that space, and where is that technology going right now?
I had a feeling you were going to ask me that, and I went and looked not just at the last 2 years. Well, I started with the last 2 years because I knew you were framing some of the
Yeah.
conversation there. And the interesting thing is, any of the early stage funding in workforce analytics or strategic workforce planning at a data layer perspective, um, there wasn't a lot. So then I went back to the last 8.5, 9 years, and I found that there was a lot of early stage, pre-seed, seed level investments in firms that are still fairly nascent. We're talking, probably under 5 million in revenue, some of them under 3 million, and I think there's a reason for that. I think there's when I look at strategic workforce planning from a data perspective, and I think about companies like Lightcast, um, I, I think about the amount of data that's required to do effective strategic workforce planning, whether I'm looking at jobs data, whether I'm looking at skills data. And it almost requires being in the market for a long period of time. And I really think there are a couple of platforms that have that level of data. Maybe on the compensation side, it's somebody like a salary.com, maybe in the operational side, when I think about how I'm leveraging your data, I start to think about the analytics tools themselves, the platforms themselves, whether it's like a Visier or a One Model or the HCM platforms that provide some tools in that regard as well. And I think that's where my thoughts are right now about strategic workforce planning. I see some talent
Mhm.
management vendors trying to move in that direction, but they don't have the data. So if they're successful, it's going to be generating revenue for companies like yours because you have the data. And I'm not sure if we need middlemen in that space as much as we need the platforms and the data.
Well, let me build on that because I think you're saying something understated that's extremely provocative, and I agree with it, which is a lot of and this actually goes back to the 2 points you made earlier. Platforms are hot, and owning the data is essential, especially when it comes to AI. Many people analytics tools are not platforms, and they rely on the data that comes from platforms. Therefore, they don't own the data themselves, and that puts them strategically at risk at this moment. And so being a data owner, being somebody who's actually creating the value add from data seems to be essential in this moment. Would you agree with what I just said?
Oh, 100%. 100%. You've either got to have, if you're one of those analytics providers, you've got to have a large installed base and almost be sort of a de facto, and that's where it does even get riskier because when I think about what those standards are, it's like, well, that's like a Power BI and that's like a Tableau and that's like, some of the more advanced tools that are hitting the market. How does the enterprise look at their data today across the board. So yeah, I think 100% there's risk if, again, if that data is just transient, if it's just flowing through your system, huge risk.
Absolutely. Well, I want to give a quick second. I know I touched on you've got a podcast, and you mentioned earlier that you do the Pitch Fest at HR Tech every year. But can you talk a little bit about your podcast, just in case people are very interested in what you're talking about today, so that they could check it out and maybe even come see you at the HR Tech conference next year? So what's all that about?
Yeah, the podcast, it's the WorkTech podcast, aptly named. You can find it at our site, oneworktech.com. Click on podcast and you're there. It's video and audio, so it's also out on YouTube. As you mentioned, we're on the Work Defined podcast network, so it's every place that you can find podcasts. If you look for the WorkTech podcast, I try to talk to everybody that's moving the market, whether it's somebody like yourself with via Lightcast or Your Thought Leadership, or every major acquisition that I can have on the show, the acquirer and the firm being acquired, and talk about what went into the deal, investments, etc. All the topics that we've talked about, I try to dig in on that podcast. I do run the investor experience and the Pitch Fest at HR Tech, and that's where the HR Tech conference has been leaning into this whole ecosystem of bankers, investors, and startups and scale ups. And they've leaned on me to help organize that. And we've been doing it for 3 years. This year we had a great showing. And I'm excited about some of the changes that we'll continue to make to provide a better experience for those constituencies. And it's just it's a lot of work, but it's so rewarding when you're able to help these startups pitch more effectively, and then see a couple of them win and take home some cash. It's a great thing.
All right. Well, this has been fantastic, George. I'm wondering, will you join me in our Cole's Corner segment?
Yes. What? Yeah. What? I'm gonna say I'll do it. Well, let's find out what that's all
Clearly,
about.
George is an avid listener to the podcast, so he knows exactly what he's getting into. Welcome to Cole's Corner. But so the first question I've got for you in the rapid fire section is, what's the place you've never been to that you most like to go, and why?
New Zealand, because I've just always been fascinated with it. I always thought it looked beautiful, and then there's the whole Lord of the Rings thing, and I've always wanted to go there and experience it. It's just such a long way away, but I'll get there.
What's the hottest use case of AI in work tech that no one's talking about?
The hottest use case of AI in work tech that no one is talking about, I'm going to say it is workforce management. It's anything shift based, anything aligning your workforce to the work that needs to be done. That's not getting enough attention, and I think it needs it.
I love that answer. George, why do you do what you do?
I've been in this industry for over 30 years, and I started as a practitioner. I went to the vendor side. Some of that, there were some decisions along the way that I made proactively, but like any career, a lot of it was great timing. I've benefited so much from my timing in this market, and the emergence of the internet, the web, HR tech, work tech. I have a lot of fun. And I like to give back. I've said that a couple of times, and it's very true. That's why I spend so much time with emerging tech and emerging startups. I like bringing the industry along and helping folks have the kind of experience I've had.
That's wonderful, George. I got one big question for you. If you were advising a company on how to build an HCM of the future, one that will disrupt all the other HCMs, what would you encourage them to build?
Meaning
Yeah,
HCM
yeah, like a
platform.
platform.
Yeah. Okay. I would. That's a great question. Um, I think that I would look at uh, the so much of our market is bifurcated on like SMB, middle market, large enterprise. I think I would really throw all the old playbooks out the window, and I would I would break the entire HCM experience down to its sort of core workflows and elements, and I would go full on agentic. And I would say market segments be damned. Like go build something truly scalable that scales for a large enterprise while it scales to the smaller workforce. One data layer, one platform, various agents based on market segments. That's how I
I
would go
love that
for it.
answer. And I think that's actually a really good segue into the first "What am I reading?" section of Cole's Corner. So let me pull it up for you because I think it gets at that really closely. And so this was a recent LinkedIn article by Jared Johnson. I think he might be at Sam's Club because he references them, but it's called AI in the Strategic Workforce. And he talks about how Sam's Club is redefining the future of retail employment, kind of mirroring off of, they have these kind of this just go system at Sam's Club now where you can check out without even having to go to a cash register and just leave the store while you scan stuff as you go. But he talks about the implications of this type of automation on how jobs are done and how agentic workflows are going to play a role in making that happen and what its impacts are on workforce planning at Sam's Club in particular. And he even mentions the workforce management use case. So I think that's extremely interesting that you talked about that George. But I'm curious if you think about as you thinking about kind of this article. I don't know if you had a chance to read it or not, but thinking about kind of that agentic as the basis rather than maybe data or software being the basis of how a platform is constructed, and then how does that impact workforce management and workforce planning for these big firms. What are you seeing in that space, and how did you react to this article?
I think I think we're at this point in time where we have to start making decisions about, especially in our category, what is the end game with this technology? And I don't mean like what is it going to look like in 10
Mm-hmm.
years, but what I do mean is I use this phrase a lot. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think the agentic approach to with HCM or workforce management, that yes, it might have some productivity gains, and it might mean that you're not hiring as many of certain types of folks. But what's the point if it's all agents and we don't have humans working? What's the
Yeah.
point? And I think when I think about a store where robots and AI are stocking shelves, and I'm picking up product, and I'm not interfacing with anyone, and I get a little nervous about that. When I think about that store, and I think about agents making the human beings that are working there more effective to stock the shelves, and they're there to help me if I need it, and they're earning a living wage. And yes, maybe there are fewer of them than there would have been a couple of years ago, but maybe because of all of this, we've got more shops like this and more environments where we can have that experience, smaller businesses with people earning even better living wages. That I get excited about. That's sort of what it brings to mind for me is, it sounds like a wonderful future, but I think we need to be careful. It's a really slippery slope that we're on. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot of buzz these days recently about digital clones, and that really scares me. That's a whole different part of the
Yeah.
workforce. But I'm not sure why we need digital clones. other than to replace the people that are doing the work today. And that scares me. So I don't know. A lot of thoughts
Yeah.
that come up with this type of article and concept.
No, I think that's very thoughtful. The thing, like, you even see this in East Asian countries now that have these things called dark factories, where it's 100% automation, and then so much so that they don't need human beings, so they don't even turn the light on in the factory, because why would you turn on the light if there's no one there? And I think, this kind of relentless pursuit of productivity just for productivity's sake, I think you've definitely hit on a nerve there of like, are we building technology for humans? Are we building technology to supplant humans? And I think that's kind of a societal question that we're navigating at this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And until we're better at retraining and reskilling at a macro level, at a workforce level, we're moving a little too fast. It seems. Now here I am in tech, following tech, consuming everything I can about the tech. And I get that, but I think it's
Yeah.
to what end is what we need to be thinking
All
about.
right, let me hit you with the next article. You present a lot of data, and everything that you publish is one of the reasons I appreciate your work. And so you could argue that some of what you build is sort of like a dashboard. Dashboards are a hot topic in any of the analytics professions that we've talked about on the podcast. But anybody who's read my book or has listened to the podcast knows that I have very much a love-hate relationship with dashboards. And so I thought this one was a really funny one. It was called "The Backwards ROI on Dashboards" by a guy named Chris Heiniger. And Chris, this is excellent work. And so what he decides to do is sort of a cynical, tongue-in-cheek exercise as he creates a dashboard to describe his family. And so it's like the number of human beings, trying to put metrics in there to understand what's for dinner, who's dropping off the kids, what school district is best for us. He says he's got 6 kids. And one of the things that he notices in the dashboard is he says there's an inherent problem. When information is simplified enough to fit on a dashboard, it's no longer useful for decision making. And then he said, yes, I mean, even anticipating the pushback that I know I'm going to get from these analysts who are listening. And they're saying, no, this is just bad design. Good dashboards don't work like that. But no, the best dashboards have the same structural problem. To be useful, they need to be generic. But if you get too detailed, they no longer are digestible. And so there's this sort of this dashboard paradox of sorts. So what did you think about this one? Do you like dashboards? Are you a dashboard fan yourself? What were your thoughts on this article?
You know what? I get the struggle, even from my own business perspective. Um, it's you just can't please everyone. It's either too simple or too much, too complex. I think that I get it. I get it, and it's true. I mean, for a career of in the tech space, everybody wants dashboards, and they tend to be not used. They're not utilized. So it's I
Yep.
get the struggle. Um, I think, but I think they're effective. It's just that they need to be. My take is they're a little bit more consumption based. Like we're going to use them and then move on to the next dashboard over time. So like a vendor perspective or an internal support perspective, thinking we built the dashboards and now we're done. Probably not. You probably need to revisit every quarter, every half year, whatnot. That's my take.
I mean, anybody who's using tooling out there knows that most of these tools, the first level of being able to use them is you can pull a report, right? And once you've pulled enough reports, you realize I never want to see another
Yeah.
report again. And so then you move on to the dashboard phase. You're like, well, there's got to be an upgrade from a report. And so you create this nifty dashboard. But then again, you look at it once, you go, oh, this looks nice, or it doesn't look nice a lot of times too. But oh, it looks nice, and then you never do anything with it. So the thing I'm actually been experimenting with lately is like, can you create what we're calling data stories? And so can you, instead of trying to create a dashboard that's easily digestible, but nobody ever uses. Could you just go through and answer the most common questions with data and turn it into a story itself? And I think that might be the future, but who knows? Maybe if we fast forward 3 years from now, I'm going to hate data stories too. But that's probably another conversation for another day. I did want to give you credit, and
Yeah, things change really fast.
you're not wrong. And who knows if dashboards are even going to be a thing in the future? So we'll see. But the last article I've got is actually something that you put out recently, and I think you referenced some of the companies earlier, but I just wanted to give an example of just the awesome work that you do. And she said, a warning for HR leaders: not all labor market data is created equal. And this is very timely in the sense that, especially with at least at the moment we're talking, there's a government shutdown, and so the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States is not publishing any data right now. But even before the government shutdown, there had been questions of like, can you find something that's better than the BLS, or is the BLS a dinosaur? And I think you do a very measured job within this article talking about the value of open source governmental published pieces of data and what value they bring, but also the rise of private and alternative data sets and the promises and the pitfalls of those. And so you break them into, I think, three categories: payroll and HRES data, job posting and profile data, compensation benchmarks and historical data. And then you talk, and again, I think this is what's so wise about it. You talk about the strategic value of blending those data sources together to try to get closer to what you might call capital T truth when it comes to this information. And so I thought this was an incredibly insightful but also practical article. But I was hoping maybe you could talk about what was kind of the onus behind this, and where you see this space going at the moment.
Yeah, the impetus here was there was a bit of when I wrote that, it was coming off of a bit of a spike of criticism around the BLS data. And it was actually at a point where there was a big question: was there going to be a jobs report that was going to be whatever that timing was? And now, as you said, we're in a shutdown and there's nothing. But I wanted to sort of rise above a lot of it was
Yeah.
political. I wanted to rise above the politics, and to be honest, Cole, it's always been the issues with the BLS data, and there are issues with it. There are issues with the way that they gather their data, the format, all of it. There's issues, but every time I hear someone complain about it, I quickly figure out they don't really understand what
Mm-hmm.
it is, and anybody who's working with that data for any purpose views it as one data point, and they're generally getting data from other places. So at that point where there were issues and so much, there was so much noise about it, I thought, okay, I'm going to do my part to try to calm things down. I don't know if that's possible, but just explain what it is and how it fits with these other data sets that we have access to.
No, I think that's lovely, and I think frankly we need it right now, because I always saw that data was supposed to be above the fray, and for whatever reason, it doesn't appear to be as above the fray as it used to be. And so maybe we can kind of get back to that point where data is seen as kind of ground truth, and we have a shared set of facts, and we can all kind of come to similar conclusions as a consequence. So I think that's very admirable to approach it in that way. But as I mentioned earlier, we're recording this in October or around Halloween and 2025, but this is going to be, I think, the first episode of 2026. So hopefully at this point, everybody's having a good, recovery from their hangover from New Year's Eve, and going to have a good 2026. But any well wishes you want to give to people for the new year, George, before we wrap up?
Gosh, it's scary to think that this will be the first episode of 2026. I'm so curious when I get to watch this, what's going on in the world. Uh, I hope that everybody has a safe end of the year and beginning of the new year, and that my predictions don't sound foolish by the time I'm watching
Just
this.
remember, George stands by his predictions with 100% conviction. So I but I appreciate you joining me, George. Thank you so much for being a guest. Again, check out George, founder of WorkTech. Check out his podcast. Go see him at HR Tech, and he's in a variety of places. And if you have any interest in learning about the HR Tech 100 Fund, feel free to reach out to him as well. But George, any parting words before we wrap up?
Just thanks for having me, Cole. I always enjoy this, and I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for what you do. You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, George LaRocque. Thanks for joining us, George.